Hi, my name is Claudio Aguayo, and today I'll be presenting about informing immersive learning design from the epistemology of the Santiago School of Cognition. Okay, let's start with the Santiago theory of cognition. The landmark book published by Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela in 1980 was Autopoiesis and Cognition, the realization of the living. Yet their ideas can be traced back to the early 70s and their book De Máquinas y Seres Vivos, or On Machines and Living Beings. Let's start with the concept of autopoiesis. Autopoietic systems can be defined as those that can self-maintain themselves and reproduce over time based on their own set of internal rules. In this classic diagram, we can see the circle with arrows, which represents an autopoietic unit or system, the environment at the bottom, and a two-way arrow between the autopoietic unit and the environment, signaling the interaction that happens. Now let's focus on the particularities of this interaction. Structural coupling is this process of co-interaction between an autopoietic unit and its environment, and or between two autopoietic units as well. An important concept within structural coupling is this notion of adaptation over time, or co-adaptation over time. We can see in this diagram how the autopoietic unit can adapt itself or reconfigure itself depending on the changes on the environment, which is a process that occurs simultaneously between the environment and the unit. In this diagram, we can see this process even better. So initially on the left, we can see the organism-medium relationship that is not so well defined, represented by a gray cloud. But through recurring and recursive interactions, the relationship becomes more focused, producing an object. An important point here is that an outside observer might mistakenly believe that the organism adapted to the object, when in reality the organism-environment interaction created the object, or the new structure between the organism and the environment. All of these ideas point to the notion that living systems are cognitive systems, and that living as a process is a process of cognition, this being a fundamental concept within the Santiago School. And more specifically regarding human experience, we can also say that human experience is embodied and enacted with the environment through a continuous process of active perception and sense-making. Let's have a look at this concept of autopoiesis applied in digital design. And here I want to make a note that when I talk about autopoiesis in this context, I'm referring to the qualitative or the non-molecular version of autopoiesis. Let's consider the situation where we have on one side the digital affordances or the digital tools, and on the other side we have the users or the people using the technology. And in this coming together between the tool and the user, we have the learning process occurring. Yet this process is embedded in a context, for example, within an educational dimension, an ecological, a sociocultural, a technological dimension, and many other contexts. And what we call here digital affordances is referring to user interfaces or UI. And on the other side, when we refer to users, we are referring to user experience or UX. So framing the Santiago School within education, we can say that the process of cognition can be regarded as a process of learning. If we look at this learning process, therefore, as a process of structural coupling or reciprocal coupling, in theory, we could assume that user interfaces and the digital and the technology behind it could be embedded with autopoietic properties, which I will define shortly. And on the other side, we have users, which by definition, as being living organisms, are autopoietic units. And again, this process can be visualized occurring within a medium or an environment, which is relevant to human experience. This theoretical and speculative exercise can indeed help us to address some critical challenges in digital design. For example, the first challenge, how can we minimize the decay of digital interventions over time? And the answer could be in this notion of self-maintenance found within autopoietic systems. Or another challenge, such as how can we achieve widespread learning outcomes in diverse, multicultural, and complex settings? And the answer could be in this concept of adaptability, which is integral to autopoietic units and their relationship with their environments. Another important point provided by the Santiago School is that every human experience is unique. Coming back to the diagram, we can consider this uniqueness in a way that one user interface in particular may produce different user experiences on different users, which brings us to this notion of the concept of UX design being problematic, simply because we cannot design a user experience. But what we can really do is to design interface experiences that will facilitate a unique user experience. We can design the previous step to the UX, which is the IX or the interface experience. So one outcome from this is that the focus of digital learning design ought to be to create self-maintaining and adaptable or autopoietic interface experiences. Okay, let's move to this notion of human experience. And at this point, the Santiago School indicates that cognition is enacted. Enaction is defined as the idea that organisms create their own experience through their actions. They create their own reality. Another important concept to be discussed is the notion of cognition being embodied. According to the Santiago School, the process of cognition does not reside in the central nervous system or the brain only, but in the body as well. So if we consider all of these concepts, autopoiesis, structural coupling, inaction and embodiment and cognition, we can pose ourselves the following question: how to best design immersive learning experiences if human experience is to occur as per the Santiago School of Cognition? And the answer really is that it's about designing embodied and enactive immersive experiences. In terms of design itself and creative practice, this calls for a focus on the process of perception, of cognition, the ecosomesthetics, the emotions, the haptics, the embodiment, the context or the space, the situations or the time, the temporal dimension, the culture, the spiritual dimension, the metaphysical realm, and so forth. For example, it is recognized that our body will react in a different way, will vibrate in a different way depending on the emotions we are feeling. How can we design immersive learning environments in such a way that we can facilitate the expression of a particular set of emotions, which can be linked to the process of learning itself? Another very important concept is that our very process of perception is actually tricking us. Our mind, our cognitive process, is making up a reality that does not exist, but we perceive it as such. We live it, we construct it, we enact it as such. Or in this visual effect, when you look around, you perceive that the shapes are moving, but in fact they are not. And so if this tricking is in place, how can we harvest that during our design processes to achieve a more meaningful learning? So this really brings the notion, what is the real nature of perception and of human experience? What is it that we don't know about it, and how can we design to maximize it in our favor when we are designing for learning outcomes? Or perhaps in relation to our environment, to our natural environment. What are we not perceiving that is out there? And how can we perhaps, from a different ontology, from a different understanding of the world, perceive such things that are part of nature? So in our work at the App Lab, we have been exploring all of these ideas in applied practice and practice-based research. Just to show you some examples, the Mesh 360 project exploring mixed reality simulation in paramedicine education. We use immersive learning environments to provoke learning, and in that context, we consider highly perceptive environments in terms of visual effects and sound effects to bring about those emotions and those biological and physiological responses to an immersive environment. And how can we harvest that in our favor in terms of producing the learning outcomes that we want for our learners, for our future paramedics? Other research that is part of this special track is the one that Ali Tahir is leading in as part of his PhD, and how embodied immersive design can facilitate experience-based learning and self-illumination or discovery. And in this context, we can see how different design styles can evoke or produce particular aesthetics And what type of stories can we tell about a particular environment if we are using such techniques? Perhaps we can add layers of ancestral knowledge or traditional knowledge in relation to what is the real nature of our environment. Another piece of research that is aligned with the Santiago School is what James Smith Harvey has been leading in terms of exploring embodied haptic design in mixed reality environments, and how by focusing on the embodiment and the tactile and the lived experience with real objects can be part, for example, of a mixed reality environment that is educating learners about the benefits of marine conservation. Okay, so as a summary of this presentation, the concept of autopoiesis provides a lens to consider how to create and design digital learning tools and platforms as emergent and self-regulated systems. We can also say that embodiment and enaction provide a fertile ground for the understanding and conceptualization of human perception and experience, and guide creative immersive learning design. And finally, the philosophical rationale coming from the Santiago School in immersive digital learning design invites us to consider or reconsider and reconceptualize the nature of learning and of human experience within artistic and creative practice. And this is an invitation for all of you to consider how the Santiago School may inform and guide your current or future practice. Thank you very much for your attention.